It's what makes one game about trains and the rest of them about zombies. There's actually many common themes persistent in board games. But what happens when a game designer wanders outside the realm of familiar themes and tries something different? Well, sometimes something inventive and wonderful happens. And other times the results can only be described with a rude sound effect. Well, today I'm joined by Joel Eddy of Thru Review, who plays and reviews more board games in a single day than most of us do over the course of at least 2 days. Joel and I will be discussing our opinions on what board game themes work, which ones don't, and why. So, please help me in welcoming Joel Eddy to the show. Thank you, Joel.
My pleasure, Chaz. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem. You have been doing board game reviews for at least 5 years now or so, isn't that right?
Yeah, going into my 5th year, starting this February, yes.
That's amazing. And so during that time, you've seen quite a few games and quite a few themes go through your door, I would imagine.
Yeah, a fair amount, I guess. Just, everyday stuff. I guess most themes are usually trading the Mediterranean or fantasy or sci-fi. And, people don't usually seem to break out of the normal theme mode too much. But, you do see it from time to time.
When someone does try to break out of that theme and experiment with something a little bit out of the ordinary, sometimes it can be very innovative. Sometimes it can go horribly wrong. In your experience, are there any themes that you've seen in games that are just off limits? And if so, why?
Well, I've seen some really out of the ordinary, beyond the pale games that probably nobody's ever heard of. If you go back far enough, there's some games that are laden with racism and things like that. But as far as like modern games, past the 1970s into the 80s and 90s and now, I haven't seen like a theme by itself necessarily be the problem. There might be a treatment or maybe some kind of, I would call it neglect in some cases, or just maybe like an insensitivity to certain themes. But it's a rarity. We're talking like a complete drop in the bucket.
There was a game that came out recently called Bedpans Broomsticks, where one of the players controlled a nursing home, and all the other players played the part of elderly patients trying to escape the nursing home. And from my understanding, you were less than impressed with the theme of the game. And I wanted to ask you what it was about it that garnered such a reaction and why.
Well, the theme itself is interesting because to me, the part that bothered me about it was the whole act of like the idea of the nursing home kind of being a prison in some senses. The game is not really clear communicating why the elderly folks are trying to escape. It's just kind of a nebulous thing. And the one thing that kind of struck a chord for me was it's a tile laying game in addition to being sort of like a Scotland Yard, Nuns on the Run kind of idea. And instead of having a board and trying to maneuver and find things, you're kind of laying out tiles, and then you've got to try to pin the old folks down. And so the reasoning given in the rule book for the tile laying and sort of building this hospital or home on the fly was the old folks were so doddering and forgetful and all these things, and it basically showing symptoms of Alzheimer's or dementia or some disease like that, where they had no idea really the layout of the hospital. Their memory retention was nil, and they needed to escape for some reason that they had forgotten as well. So to me, that's kind of a serious topic, of that disease, and people spend a lot of money looking for cures for these, and people have family members that have experienced that, and they go through, a lot of heartache and things like that. And it seemed to me a little bit, I don't want to call it callous, but it was sort of neglectful, the treatment of the theme, because it's not like let's say I had a grandmother that was around and we brought this out and I thought this was funny or something. I mean, that would be kind of a pretty bad situation. That would, of course, be on me to, be mindful of bringing that game out in the right situation. But maybe if I were to bring it to a game night and somebody was dealing with that at home and I didn't know, that I think that would stir some emotion and stuff. So I think the theme of like nursing homes or the theme of a mental disorder even isn't necessarily like off limits, but I think you have to be careful when you attack a theme or try to investigate a theme.
So I'm wondering, with a theme like that, if there's a way to take, well, another comparison I was thinking of would be the recent game Freedom, about freeing slaves, versus there's a little bit of an uproar recently about the actual slave card from Five Tribes, which is one of the resources that you will get and use. And so the difference there. So do you think that it's possible to take a very sensitive theme and make it acceptable?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, Freedom was one of my favorite games from, it's 2013, I guess it would have been. And I thought the way they approached that theme was, it put me kind of in my place in a lot of ways, because you have to make a lot of really tough decisions in that game about sort of juggling I would guess you would call it sort of the special interests, and you have to deal with kind of Congress in sort of the national mood, if you will, with the card section of that game. And then you have sort of this logistical puzzle of freeing the slaves physically from the plantation. So you're kind of working on two fronts. So you've got to make decisions to kind of focus your efforts on one or the other. And sometimes you'll move a slave or group of slaves up to sort of attract a slave catcher to have some escape, up on this different route. And there's a couple of times, that usually every single game, where you have to basically sacrifice some people for kind of the greater good. So the whole notion of sacrifice is immense in that game, and it really puts me back and makes me think. And then you look at it's subtle though. It's good that you brought up Five Tribes, because there are slave cards in there, and I go back and forth in my mind about the treatment of that, because if you look at the theme that Five Tribes is from, Tales of the Arabian Nights and that whole sort of fantasy world, there's slaves in that. So to not have slaves would not necessarily be thematic. Now, the slaves in that game are not really analogous to, slaves in the United States, or slaves in Israel or Egypt, or all over the world. Still today, there's a lot of slavery. I don't have a bigger problem with it, but I kind of, like I said, I go back and forth, because part of me is saying maybe Days of Wonder should know that people would be sensitive to it, but on the other hand, why shy away from it? So I think, me personally, I think everybody's going to have a different reaction to that. I kind of let Five Tribes off the hook, so to speak. Not that I even really think there's a hook to be let off, but to me, that is part of the theme. And like I said, the treatment of slavery in Freedom Underground Railroad is, it's educational, but beyond educational for me, because it really puts you in decision-making mode where you're making tough choices.
That makes a lot of sense. The way you kind of feel about Five Tribes kind of is analogous to me. It reminds me of kind of some other games where it might not necessarily be insulting, but it might be more just in bad taste. They could have chosen so many different things to put on that card to represent, that one idea that they wanted to represent.
Yeah, definitely.
Are there things like that in your own experience, or with games that you've shown to your game group? Are there then themes or artistic decisions or such that a game is made that aren't necessarily completely off-putting, but are in bad taste and actually will deter you from playing a game? I'm thinking of, in addition to the Five Tribes example, I'm thinking of the Warlock in Mage Wars, which has a very dark theme, working with demons and stuff, which I'll still play the game, but there's certain people I won't introduce that to, or, and other people they're like, will play any other character. And also the Chaos in the Old World, which is, I've never played, but from my understanding is a pretty solid game, but the subject matter and the art direction in it. You're playing on a board, which essentially is a representation of a big stretched piece of flesh, with the board on it. So when you encounter those types of themes and artistic decisions, is that something that actually will deter you or people actually to in a different direction away from those games?
Yeah, I think I'm aware of who I'm playing games with. In my particular game group, kind of my Thursday night group, I don't really have anybody in that group that I know of anyway that would have trouble playing like, the Warlock or something with demonic, depictions or like the stretched skin in Chaos in the Old World. There are folks in the group that probably don't have any moral compunctions about playing that kind of game, but they're not attracted to it just based on, I think they think it's kind of childish, and it's not something they feel like playing. And so when we have a certain group configuration, if it's more slated towards, I'll just say like the Euro crowd, then like Imperial Assault, which is just Star Wars, won't even come out, and a Battle Lore and that kind of thing won't come out. But if we have sort of a balanced group and we're like, oh hey, we've got enough of us here that enjoy this style of game, and we'll break out some Eldritch Horror or whatever like that. And for example, I play games with my folks all the time, and they really don't have interest in a game that's a fantasy setting, not because they don't have a moral objection to that style of thing. It's just not in their taste and sort of not for their palate. But my son, for example, is all over Battle Lore and anything that has miniatures really. But
do you think that there is a bias in not necessarily maybe gaming worldwide or whatever, but let's just take our own culture, the American culture. Do you think there's a bias between games with violent themes versus adult themes? The game in question that kind of brings this up is a game that was kickstarted recently and is about to hit store shelves here in the next month or so, I believe, Lapdance, in which players control an adult strip club with male and female performers in it.
Yeah, I've actually played Lapdance, and I know there's been a big uproar about it, and I would never have it in my house, even though I have played it. I do have a 13-year-old boy, and I've got an older boy who's out of the house. And it's just not something I would have in the house because I'd have to answer a whole bunch of questions I don't feel like answering by having the game. Why do you have this game? What is this game? Show me all the pictures in the game, So I don't think that's good for me, but the game existing and other folks playing the game, I don't really have, issue with. I don't really care for the game. From what I understand, they're kind of changing the rules a little bit for some of the things, or at least tweaking some of the cards in the Kickstarter. That might make it more palatable to me. But as far as the theme goes, my personal take on it is it's actually, to me, unfortunately titled. Lapdance to me sort of evokes strip club and seedy dark and sort of depressing and desperate and sort of that world of doing certain things for money. Whereas the game itself, when you're playing and doing things, it's very fantasy, where it's very unrealistic and there's multiple different fetishes, I guess, for different needs or satisfying different needs or whatever. And it borders on the absurd and the ridiculous. To me, that's very comedic. I don't really have a problem with that. It's silly. You can honestly turn on any TV chase, and if you have cable, and probably see suggestions of most of what happens, in that game. And it's a very silly game and stuff. So I don't think, for me, if you're getting into that world of sexuality, it doesn't seem to me to depict any sort of, dominance or power or, any sort of degradation in my mind. And I know other people will have a completely different view of that, and that's 100% okay with me. But so I think that game's probably okay, even though I think the mechanics and stuff could be improved. But
mechanically speaking. Well, I know that Artipia Games got a lot of flack as well because they released a statement about Lapdance when it was going on to Kickstarter, saying something to the effect of, well, this game is better than a lot of war games because you're not killing people, you're not fighting, so this is better than that, and everyone should just calm down. And I don't want to put too many words in their mouth, but to summarize, that seemed to be the gist of what the statement they released. And that to me seemed like a real bias of showing the bias of violence versus adult themes in our culture. And to be honest, I don't know if I agree with their statement at all, because what seemed to me what a lot of people's problem with a game like Lapdance is not necessarily the theme, but the objectification of people that it can lead to. And you can fight for what you believe in and fight for what you know is right, but you can't objectify someone for something you believe in. There's a difference there. At least I see a difference there. Do you think that? Would you rather see more games that are like Lapdance with these type of alternate themes, which might be more volatile, than more of the same, war and that type of violent themes?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think I'll answer a couple of points there. First is the objectification thing. I think the thing with Lapdance, in my experience, is everything was being objectified. Men, women, different body types, and different, like I said, fetishes and costumes and accessories and all that stuff. So to me, it's like overwhelming and stimulus overload. I didn't really feel like any one person or type of person was being sort of singled out. So I think it kind of, quote unquote, gets away with it there. And I do remember reading what you mentioned there about sort of, hey, at least nobody's dying in this game and nobody's killing each other. And, I kind of, initially I'm like, okay, yeah, obviously, okay, I get it. And I kind of want to leave it there and stop there, but I think out of the other side of that statement by them, and it's kind of a paraphrasing, it's kind of like, well, war games are bad, and they, any game with violence is necessarily bad. And I don't think that's the case either. I think there's, we're going to get into heavy psychology here, but I think in a certain sense there is a sort of outlet and there's a certain sort of escapist that happens. Like a lot of people listen to really hard rock and roll or heavy metal music, and they're the nicest people you would ever meet. And there's other people that listen to that style of music that are criminals, and just like people that listen to pop and, bubblegum music are criminals and can be nice people. So I think there's an outlet there that happens through sort of reenacting the violence or the physicality of things. And in terms of like war games, there's also the historical study side of it and kind of learning from, what if scenarios and, kind of putting yourself in situations similar to Freedom. It is historically based, and you're kind of putting yourself in that decision-making role to say, okay, now I kind of empathize with, why did these people do that? That seems dumb to me from the 10 seconds of footage I watched on the news channel. That's dumb, but you really don't have the full breadth and scope of the situation. And that's one of the things that I think certain games can start to approach.
That makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of things. Well, Freedom, just like you were talking about, Freedom is an excellent example of that. I've heard many people talk about how they played it, and it not only was entertaining, but it opened their eyes to some things, like you were saying. Like, I never really knew about this or read about this in history class, or this was glossed over, or you never got the feeling of everything that was involved in this type of struggle in that scenario. And it's amazing that a game like that actually can get that type of praise about it. Last question, just out of curiosity, what is the absolute worst theme in a game that you have ever endured?
The worst theme? Oh man, I mean, you know what? It's from games that I like. I've played Acquire quite a bit, and I've recently played a game of 49, which is a similar sort of thing where you have these very bland, stark boards where you're sort of, you got different locations. And Acquire, you're technically building hotels or property, and Game of 49, you're just getting numbers. And it's like there's no theme, but it's just some games, and it's ones that I even like the theme just comes across so mathematically that from a theme perspective, I don't even want to be involved with it. But, if I'm in the mood where I'm like, let's pull some levers and let's, go head to head and, think abstractly and just be very competitive, then I'm more than happy to play those style of games. But the reason I hate the themes is because like when I show somebody Acquire, they're like, get that thing away from me. I don't want anything to do with it. And you know, so that the more drier themes, I love them, but it's very hard to get people to want to participate.
Well, that makes sense. I've heard the game of 49. I haven't played it yet, but I've heard it described and I've seen it. I've heard over and over again people saying, no, don't run away. Just try this game. Get past how it looks and give it a try. You'll like it. Well, hopefully this video will help some people watching explore different themes that they hadn't thought of before. So thank you for helping spread the word about that. And before we go, tell me, Joel, where can people find you on the interwebs?
Oh, you can find me on YouTube if you go and search for Drive-Thru Review. You can find me there. That's the best spot. Or you can go to drivetthruvideos.com. And then if you want to search, you know, see if I reviewed a game or something, that's probably the easiest way to find it. And then I'm on Board Game Geek as Ecomouse.
All right. And Twitter?
Oh yes, Twitter, social media. I almost forgot. I am on Twitter as E3K Mouse. Somebody stole Ecomouse when I created my Twitter account.
That's why it's spelled different. It was stolen. Okay, well, it's always a pleasure talking to you, and I will see you around the Twitters and the interwebs myself. And until next time, thanks for joining me, and I'll talk to you then.
Thanks a lot, Chaz. Appreciate it.
Any last ideas on theme or anything else related to it that you wanted to touch on?
I'm trying to think of something to say.